You. Oh, today is Wednesday, May 15th, 2024, and this is the beginning of the Petoskey Planning Commission regular meeting. Roll call.
McSweeney. Meridian. Moss. Wilmot.
Here.
Oh, okay. Okay, there turned green. Rick Newman. I have been in Petoskey since 1980 and used to live up on Bay Street for 35 years and then now have moved over by Pill Hill. And I'm an architect, and so I enjoy being involved in the Planning Commission because it has a lot to do with the things I'm interested in.
So, yeah, you may as well just join them.
I'm Al Moss. I grew up here. Sorry, thank you. In Lockwood McDonald Hospital, moved to Kalamazoo to go to Western. And was planning on moving back up here and looking for a job anyplace, basically after I got my degree. And they opened a job teaching respiratory therapy at the community college down there. I thought I might try it. I did for 36 years. So I retired in 2019 from the community college and have been back since and just have an interest in my hometown and doing the best I can for the citizens of Petoskey.
Yeah, I'm Matt McSweeney, originally from Suttonsville, Michigan. I moved to Petoskey in 2012, teach at the high school, and actually live just 2 houses up from Rick's old house on Bay Street.
Yeah, I'm Rich Moretti and I'm a retired orthotist. I moved to Petoskey about 22 years ago and have a strong interest in seeing how the community develops. So
Cynthia Lynn Rapson. I've been here for a lot of years. I've been a planning commissioner for 15 and I love the work. And I love the town. Ted?
Ted Paul, I've been here in Petoskey 34 years, anesthesiologist, former mayor, and I've been on the planning commissions about 6 years now.
Carolyn Detmer. I was born and raised. Went off to college and moved to California after graduating. Was out there for 7 years and moved back here in 2010. I live on Michigan Street. And I own my own building design company. I work out of my office from home. And welcome.
Charlie Wilmot, I've been on the planning commission for 102 years. And I moved to Petoskey in 2012. I'm an East Coaster. So my wife says I haven't relaxed yet, but I feel very relaxed tonight. Welcome.
Okay, I have a request to change to amend the I have a request to amend the our agenda and put the introduction, review and discussion of Article 5 temporary signs concerning content neutral compliance first, and then we will start our zoning discussion. So do I have a motion?
Without the amended agenda.
Well, adopt the amended agenda with another amendment, which is to move B and do that first.
Okay, so moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. All right. So we need approval of minutes.
Are the, I see there's a second set of minutes included with the amended agenda. Are they any different than the original minutes?
Yes, the minutes on your desk are the proper minutes. There were some corrections made after the packet was put together.
Okay, well then I don't know, maybe some of these, I haven't had a chance to read the revised minutes, but there are a number of items that I would suggest maybe need to be clarified regarding the back lot discussion and all of that.
Okay,
Um,
well, if you could use the most recent
okay,
version,
I'm gonna need to compare here, I guess.
yeah. Lisa, did you make changes for that? Was that where Marty Van Berlo made his changes?
There, yes, they're on this one, they're on pages, 3 and 5, I believe.
So you have those marked.
Yes,
There.
they're those.
Oh, they're underlined.
Underlined.
I see, okay, well, let me start then on page 2. Second paragraph. Last sentence. It says the new site plan shows this area with a small exit door closed off by a food structure. Well, it wasn't really closed off, I think we should say partially or partially visually obstructed by a new additional food structure, because that was not part of the original plan, so it's an additional structure or food truck, whatever we're calling it. I guess it's a structure. Whatever the right term is, yeah.
Yeah,
But I think it should be stated that that's an additional, a new item on the site plan. And also that I don't think the exit door was closed off. It was just visually obstructed, I would say. Or partially visually obstructed. Just as a clarification there. And then in the next paragraph. Again, the second to the last sentence that begins the intermodal shipping containers. And again, for clarity's sake, I just thought 2 intermodal shipping containers which are required to be built on a constructed foundation. It shouldn't be, it's stated should be built. Well, it's required to be built on a constructed foundation. And then going into the next sentence. These heavy units could settle, I think the term settle rather than sink, could settle over time without proper structure.
Supporting structure or just?
Structure should be adequate.
So instead of structure, foundation?
Yeah,
Replace-
okay, yeah, that's even more specific, foundation. Mhm.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Okay, then over on page 3, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th paragraph, and I see, yeah, this has been changed so that, because that was one of the things I picked up. 2 exits. And also it had been stated as being 5 feet tall. Well, it should have been 5 feet wide. Let's see, let me see what the new one says.
It still says tall. So that needs to be wide.
right, 60 inches wide or 5 feet wide
Okay.
to meet barrier-free requirements, because that's what this is about, right? Barrier-free.
Mhm.
So the height, there's no height requirement. So that should be 5 feet wide. With a 3-foot minimum exit.
Okay.
Maybe we should say in the last sentence on that paragraph where it started as gates. They're really meant to be exits. And so because we're talking about qualifying as exits, exit gates should be located on both the south and west sides of the property to qualify for to meet required egress. It really doesn't have anything to do with ingress. It has to do with egress. To meet required egress, I think would be the proper way to state that.
I'm just wondering if maybe behind exit, it should be in parentheses, gates per this.
Yeah,
specific
okay, that's a good,
project
that's a
or
good clarification, right? Yeah.
Rick, where are you at?
The paragraph starting Marty Van Burlo.
Okay,
So that last line would say exit, and then you're saying put in parentheses gates? Okay.
Right. Right, because in this case, they're gates. And then, let's see, on page 4, the next page over. This is in the third paragraph down, starting Mr. Ico Angeli. And it's the last sentence. Trying to figure out what I was trying to think here. Yeah, at this time or previously intermodal, maybe it should be previously intermodal shipping containers were not introduced in the site plan. And since then the plan has evolved to include them. Again, just to be more specific about the fact that the plan was changed over time without planning commission review.
Okay.
So those are the proposed revisions I would suggest.
Okay. Any discussion? So I'm looking for approval, a motion to approve with corrections given.
I also wanted to make a correction on page 5, that first paragraph, where we're identifying the intermodal storage containers to be identified as accessory structures.
On page 5,
Yeah,
what paragraph?
our motion
Oh, okay. What line is that?
3,
Third line, intermodal storage containers, and tell me again what you want
be
to change.
identified as accessory structures
Oh, yeah,
for this specific project.
okay. So all we're adding is accessory,
Yeah, I thought that's what we made the motion. on,
Yeah.
But yeah,
right? Anything else? I'll take a motion to approve the minutes with the changes.
I'll make a motion.
Okay. Okay, Carolyn made the motion, Matt seconded. All in favor of approving, aye. Right. That's passed. So now we're moving on to the sign committee. Charlie's been very involved. And has done a good job organizing things, so he's gonna do the introduction.
You have in your packet, slide, can you put the slides up?
So we had a meeting, what day? Tuesday?
Yeah.
Whatever. Here we are. And, if you turn to the first page, what's important for the planning commission is that there is at least one chapter in the sign ordinance that was made, which is out of sync with. Thank you, with a Supreme Court decision. 2000. She pushed it before and just faded out. There's a concern that we'd like to bring to you that there is an urgency to get this fixed. And while we have a lot of other things on our agenda, the sign committee is proposing how to address that. So this first page describes the decision that was rendered in 2015 by the Supreme Court. What it boils down to is that the ordinance must be content neutral. You shouldn't have to police the signs by reading them. They are signs. So that changes dramatically in chapter 5, which we'll get to in a second. So if you look at the second slide, I don't like to read slides to people, they can read for themselves. I will read the first 3 words there: time, place, and manner attributes. So you can do location, dimensions, you just can't refer to signs as garage signs, you can't refer to signs as for a charity or for an event. You have to refer to them simply as signs, different types of signs, wall signs, freestanding signs, and window signs are the 3 that are important, because as you'll see in the last slide, there are 12 chapters to the sign ordinance. The chapter that is important and needs addressing immediately is the permitted temporary signs, having to do with, yard signs and the window signs. And those are the ones that are completely out of sync with the Supreme Court ruling. So the sign committee has a proposal for you to consider, understanding that this is the first time that you have really heard about this issue. And the sign committee's been busy at work since last September, reviewing various chapters, but as a result of this last meeting, really focused in on the temporary signs, and bring to you for your consideration a replacement vehicle, which is 1 page long. It's also in your packet, referred to as Article 5. It's very short on words, but for clarity, it charts all of the requirements so that you can easily see what the requirements are. So I don't believe that we're proposing to take action on this today, but rather to consider this today and to give us any comments that you have today or over the course of the next, a couple of days or weeks, so that we can evaluate this and hopefully schedule in as soon as possible, perhaps even a special meeting just to get it out of the way, to move it forward into a public hearing so that it can be advanced to council and corrected as quickly as possible. So does that pretty much introduce it?
The key word is content neutral, so does everybody understand that concept? And also, just to be clear, this is permitted temporary signs, doesn't deal with anything else. So it doesn't deal with the signs, permanent signs downtown or anywhere. It's just for permitted temporary signs, which are allowed in the residential area and all of the other places. And there are lots of reasons to need that, particularly the freestanding signs are probably the ones that are the most important to get under control. So for instance, for the residential, for the freestanding sign. I've liked the Ann Arbor, take on signs because this involves political signs, which are just something you can't say that word out loud when you're talking about temporary signs. But also real estate signs, things that need to be used when they need to be used. And unfortunately, we can't have rules for real estate signs because they have different needs than political signs. But according to the courts, you can't make those exceptions. All signs have to be treated the same way. And the test for that is if you have a rule, but the person has to read what's on the sign in order to determine if they followed the rule or not, then that rule isn't valid. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, so what we've done here, and take the first line as an example, we've split it into the zoning districts that we feel these regulations should apply. And we've further split each zoning district into freestanding window and wall signs. And you'll see that we've adopted, it's new to our code, a total maximum square footage for an individual property. That is pretty new to our, isn't that new in our code?
Well,
Lisa?
it's how Ann Arbor set it up and it seemed
Right,
like,
but it's new to our code.
and Lisa said it would be a lot easier to
Yeah.
regulate.
Currently, you're allowed 2 signs, 6 square feet.
Yeah, okay. 6 square feet each, right? So this puts a maximum on the total square footage that you have as well as the maximum number that you can have. But if you'll notice on that one, freestanding signs 6, well, the signs are going to have to be pretty small if you're going to meet the other requirements for total square footage, like 20 square feet. 6 signs will each be pretty small. And the other thing that you need to consider is not only whether or not you agree with those dimensions as shown in this chart, but you also need to review and consider the display periods that are here, which are picked up from our existing ordinance. I think for the most part, isn't it? Did we add anything new in the display?
I don't think so.
The freestanding,
No, for any of these for the duration of display. That's all from our existing code.
not the
No.
first one, not the 6 up to 60 continuous days.
Oh, is that?
That is new.
Okay.
Yeah,
I looked at the calendar and that 60-day unit enables, we have elections in May, August, and November. And you can do 60 days for one election period, have a 30-day break and do the next 60 days. There was a court case, I think in Washington, where the court said 60 days wasn't enough for signs. But it didn't impact, I think it might have impacted the state of Washington, but it didn't impact federally.
So kind of the issue is like, signs required permit when they have on there sponsored by a unit of government, a nonprofit organization, you'd have to read the sign, right? So that's the issue. If it's content.
If you have to read the sign,
Right,
it's
so
illegal.
that's why our current ordinance doesn't work.
Correct. Because it's rife with references to the
Right.
type of sign.
Rick?
Charlie, have the square footages or heights changed at all from what the current zoning ordinance or sign ordinance?
Somewhat
is?
in certain cases.
Okay.
Which we haven't highlighted here. But in your consideration, you may wish to compare these to the existing ordinance, so you can see what direction we
So
take.
are they generally the same or generally maybe if they've altered, they've allowed a little more area or a little more height?
I would say that we've tried to compromise on those issues. So
Okay.
some are a little less and some are a little more.
Okay,
I guess if I could interject on that point, I mean, rather than each commissioner going through it, I think we could get something that we all have, so we all know what we're talking about. Some kind of comparison.
Right. That would mean getting. Can you do that, Lisa? Set this up and show it using the old ordinance?
Or some kind of comparison sheet or something.
I mean, for instance, number. When we tried to address political signs some years ago. They kind of died because no one could agree on the number that was sufficient. Some people believed it was too much and some believed it was too little. This is what Ann Arbor settled on. And they haven't had any court cases, so. I think that's a reasonable number, and also, as long as people understand they have to have the signs abut, they could actually get 12 signs up because they could. Put them back to back, so granted, you'd see one side then the other. So you can double up on signs. So I think for in terms of freedom of speech, that 6 adequately allows someone to express what they want to express.
Wouldn't the backside count toward the maximum square footage though, if it was a different message? Or even if it's the same message, would, you know? Because if you have a sign that's parallel to the street, then you're only gonna see one side of it, but if you have a sign that's perpendicular to the street,
Right,
you're gonna see both sides, and wouldn't each side constitute a sign area?
and well, according to the city, thank you for pointing that out. There is a case for you can only have, we allow 2-sided signs, right?
Correct.
So do we count for square area, do we count both sides of if there's
I guess that would.
front and back, do you count both
Would that be getting into the
in our current
content?
ordinance?
I guess.
I can say from experience with signs, typically they're either double-sided and put perpendicular to the road,
Mhm.
or if they do a single-sided, they put them parallel and they may have 2. That's typically how most people do it, just because of the cost of signage. At least that's what I'm. But typically, I mean, so if it's a double-sided sign, we still count it as one sign,
Okay,
and we can't read the content of the sign to determine if it's a different sign or not, so.
And only the square footage counted for one side of that double-sided sign.
Okay,
But perhaps that should be articulated here. Good.
Could you, were these zones, these were already created within the sign ordinance?
Those are our actual zones. for the
Yes.
City of.
Like the way they were lumped together? Like, could you create a zone B2, B2A and have your own, you know, max sign area, sign type, just for the downtown, core downtown area?
Well, there's a different level of confusion here that's added because non-commercial signs are the ones that fall under the new Supreme Court ruling. Commercial signs, it's a different ball of wax. We can regulate commercial signs more than we can non-commercial signs.
Right.
Does that address your?
right, to answer your question. For temporary signs, they all have to, no matter what zoning they're in, they all have to be the same. Because if you allowed bigger signs in another area, they would have a larger freedom of speech than the, say, residential. If you allowed the B2A to be bigger. Actually, we do allow more.
I was gonna say, that is a little bit different when you look at the zones.
I think what's regulated is content.
Yeah, so you can.
Exactly what we're stating.
Manner.
Right, so I was just wondering if we could take that central downtown area and have, you know, more of like a R1, R2, R3 temporary sign.
Or should it be
Size.
saying permitted temporary non-commercial signs, and that's our ordinance change. The article, it's a new article. Something. Because we're not regulating commercial signs, we're regulating the non-commercial.
And we're also regulating temporary commercial signs.
This is only temporary signs.
Yes.
Commercial and non-commercial.
Yes. Right.
But to your point, should they be separated into commercial and non-commercial, temporary signs?
I didn't write this, but the way I interpret it, that's exactly what they did, is they have a group for residential and a group for commercial, and these are.
Right, but certain areas of our commercial are our downtown business district.
Right,
Which
and
we're
we
saying
tried
should
to,
be separated.
well, do you think that downtown business district should be separated from the rest of commercial?
That, I was just throwing that out there as its own district downtown. If we are looking to, my understanding is not have, an out of control situation where we're having signs all over the place. If you have the central downtown district as its own, with its own regulations.
What would you change from these other two?
I don't know, maybe you lessen the per sign square footage, make them a little smaller.
What we're trying to do is be sympathetic to people like, clearance sales up in their window and that kind of thing. So we can't restrict them from having signs.
Yeah, but let's be careful too. You wouldn't want to give favoritism to the central business district. And then a commercial business that's in one of the corridors. There's a difference in size.
Yeah.
And that was part of the Supreme Court too, was because of the Reed versus Gilbert was the church was required to have a smaller sign with a different duration than a real estate sign or a nonprofit sign. So it wasn't just about location, it was also about the size. So, but I want to make it try to make it as uniform and consistent.
But I'm not sure, because the distinction though, the decision was on content. So
No,
you made two different sizes.
it was also based on size.
Right, because the distinguish was not two zoning districts, but two different types of content, a church, a religious sign versus
Yes, correct.
something, a political sign maybe.
Correct.
That was
Yes, but what I'm getting at is where Matt's going was that if you carve out the CBD and you give them kind of like a preferential treatment, either less or more, and I'm in a business in the corridor, I could say that there's some level of
Inequity.
inequity with that.
but again, what we have is a Supreme Court decision on content.
Yeah.
So anything could happen, could be challenged in the future, but we specifically can't regulate on content.
Correct.
Correct.
That's what we shouldn't do. Anything else, I think we can. If it's reasonable.
The only difference I can see relative to B2 downtown is just the fact that it's very few locations would be able to have a freestanding sign, just because most buildings are lot line to lot line.
Right.
Now, whether that matters or not, I don't think it does, but that's the only difference relative to that district versus the other business districts.
Cynthia, so this table, I missed it. Was this in our packet, didn't it? When did we get this sheet?
Tonight.
Tonight.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to discuss it for me tonight. That's what I'm worried about.
I'm
You know,
hopefully,
even a little bit uncomfortable that we have much of an in-depth discussion on something that really wasn't on the published agenda. There's nothing in the packet. We amended the agenda the night before. There's nothing in the packet. I'm just seeing this tonight. It's like, I don't know how much to talk about this when I'm just seeing it.
The intention was just to introduce it, Ted.
Okay.
right.
And any 30,000 foot comments that you have going into the process of review are fine and acceptable.
I mainly wanted to get people to learn about being content neutral, because that's
Right.
a strange concept. But the rule of thumb is if you have to read it. Okay, I still want to go through this, Ted, just to explain what we did,
Okay.
but we don't need to have an in-depth conversation, but at least we can understand.
So
Yeah.
I didn't get a copy of that. Is there another one? It wasn't in, no, there we go, thank you.
Okay. All right, so the main one that's going to be an issue is the freestanding signs. So in residential, we allow a maximum number of 6, depends on how big the signs are, how many you can actually have, because you're limited to the 20 square feet. But then you go down to exceptions, which kind of addresses real estate signs, possibly event signs. So you can take the condition of the property to say, if a lot or building is for sale or lease, you can have signs for the period of time that it's for sale or lease. So that enables a place that's for sale and for sale longer than 60 days, they don't have to take their sign down, you know, and interrupt the process of the sale. And also under construction, we allow the same signs during construction, but you get to have it for only the period of time that it's under construction. There's also the issue of public right-of-way signs for freestanding. You also can't say directional signs can be used in the right-of-way. That's what usually goes there, or event signs, but we can't call them that anymore. So we just, instead of referring to any of them, we just say up to 5 days, you can have 8 square feet, which is a maximum number of 5. In a right of way, but that has to be permitted. So for the most part, these aren't permitted. You don't have to have permits for the temporary.
Well, look down the list.
Signs.
It's very clear there. So you've got no or yes in the column.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, in residential, it's not. really
Right. Right. And then what Ann Arbor did, and I thought this is a good idea, because you have the issue, particularly with politics, that there might be something, say line 5 has been that, the nurses' strike was another one, where it's an ongoing issue and has nothing to do with elections. So what Ann Arbor allowed, and you'll see an asterisk at the bottom, 1 non-illuminated temporary freestanding sign up to 6 square feet in sign area is permitted on a residential lot at any time with no limitation on display time. Such sign is subject to the placement requirements and counts toward the maximum sign area allowed for freestanding signs. So that's one that you can have on. You can have it 365 days a year. And again, we can't read the sign, so you're going to still have signs you'd rather not see year round, but it gives people their freedom of speech.
But we don't have to do that. Again, that's an,
I think it's a good policy. Then you,
I'm saying we don't have to do it though.
no, you don't, but. I
Like
think
you could not allow freestanding signs at all. If you wanted to, I'm not saying we do. We just, if we regulate them, we can't regulate them on content.
Correct.
Mhm.
Right.
Rick, I got a question for you. Could you conceivably see a freestanding sign in the downtown? On a roof?
Yeah, I suppose there could be a sign on a roof.
The freestanding sign for commercial was intended not so much for the downtown business district as it was for the corridor. They do have a you know, a number of businesses have an opportunity to put freestanding signs up.
To just make sure was that if you separated the downtown out, you would still have wall and window the same that you do in all the other business districts. But you would have freestanding signs are not allowed in the downtown.
What about on the sidewalk?
No.
Well,
That's what I
no, if they had a flower box, conceivably they could stick a sign inside the flower box. Couldn't they?
Most of those,
All commercial signs are permitted.
That's correct, but I'm looking at a temporary sign in the downtown that you could stick in a flower box with a maximum sign area of 32 square feet. It's 4 by 8 sheet of plywood. There goes your window. So I'm just thinking it through that,
Again, we don't necessarily need to make any adjustments.
yeah, just bringing that up.
Well, yeah, these are flaws.
What about, John, do you think of sandwich boards?
That would be in the sign ordinance, not a lot of
That's
sign,
not considered
a lot of sign ordinances, Ted, have sandwich boards as a distinct.
which we do.
You do.
But my question is it really just, even though we separated it out, is it really just a freestanding sign part of this, or you think you can?
I think you can separate them out.
Okay.
And the other question I have for the committee is, especially in the downtown area and any business district, the idea of having a commercial business and having window space is the transparency to see into the building. We have 75% of the window can be covered.
That's.
A maximum of 15 days in a 90-day period.
I'm just asking, is that
Everything's available for reconsideration.
Okay. From a policy point of view, do you want 75% of a window in a commercial building? Yeah, but
How many requests for permits? How many requests for permits do you have for? Oh, the 75% of the window area?
They're
They're not permitted.
very few.
Okay,
I mean, they're allowed to have them, but I mean, usually people will inquire about it and they just don't typically do anything that large. Going out of business, but that going out of business has its own regulations outside of.
is that legal? You have to read the sign.
Well, that's a different section. That's not there's something ordinance.
Right.
I guess for me, it's still hard to know what here is very similar to what our current ordinance is and what's
Right.
new. That's,
Ted, we will
okay.
take care of that.
Going back to John's question about rooftops, should there be some prohibition, some general prohibition here about signs on any rooftops?
Sure.
Yeah,
I would
I think
think
so. A sheet of plywood flying off a rooftop doesn't sound very safe.
Lisa,
It can't be a
We don't
freestanding.
allow rooftop signage.
Oh, okay, it's already prohibited.
I know it's mentioned for the downtown area, but is that in the general provision? So that applies to all, really?
I don't believe it's specific to the downtown.
Okay.
So with those what's important is to figure out a course of future action. So in order to consider this more fully and do it as quickly as possible, my recommendation would be for a special meeting at some point in the next few weeks. And the sign committee will try to make these comments a little bit more digestible for you and work with Lisa to do a comparison of the existing ones so that a further in-depth view can be taken. But if we could go directly from there to a public meeting, we're just trying to get this out of our hair as quickly as possible.
Question. Must be we were on and letting off. Under the residential, it's a permit is not required, but then we're saying up to 60 continuous days. Like, why do we even have that in there? How is that gonna be regulated?
It gets
enforced, yeah.
It gets regulated now by a couple of dedicated city employees who go around pulling things out.
Actually, that's not correct. We only take them from public right of way that are not permitted.
Okay.
In residential, we don't touch anything.
But the concept of permitting them would overwhelm city government.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why we would.
Well, I think it would be, and that's a good question, in terms of enforcement, but I would assume it'd be a situation where there was a complaint and then someone started watching it and made the people aware of what the rules were and then. But it probably have to be, someone would be focusing on that.
I thought it would be.
Well, if there's going to be a special meeting, it makes sense that it happened before our next regular meeting, so that this can be expedited at the next regular meeting, wouldn't you think?
Next regular, we have a public hearing. If we're content with what we can accomplish at the special meeting.
When does the sign committee meet?
Sign committee does not have another meeting scheduled. We're waiting for your feedback.
I just think I want the comparison before we have the meeting. The law, the Supreme Court ruling was 9 years ago. There seems to be the sense of urgency today. I mean, I know this has been talked about for over a year on the planning commission. At some time ago, I recall we had a sample thing. Clearly, I mean, the situation right now is whatever ordinance we have in our sign ordinance regarding temporary signs that involves content clearly cannot be enforced. So there's not an emergency per se. Hopefully the city staff is aware of that and is not going to go out and get in that entanglement. So basically, it's a situation where there's really, I guess in several cases, no rules on temporary signs because what we currently got is unenforceable. So I guess it's really a situation where if we did nothing, you couldn't really complain about anything. So there's some degree of moving forward. I just want to make sure we're all happy with it and we get time to think about it. Some public input probably, I don't know.
Today's the 15th. Today's the 15th. So we could meet for the sign committee, we usually meet on Tuesdays, don't we?
We already have a meeting scheduled for the 25th, I'm sorry, not 25th, the 28th.
Right, okay,
We do.
yeah. So Charlie, how about if we meet, could we do this on the 21st? Does that work for you?
Sign committee?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Then we could address this then on the 28th. We could get our documents in a row and then hopefully be ready.
To the full commission
with an
agenda packet for.
So
That would be review and then the next.
the special meeting would just be reviewing it, and then if it's approved, then you vote to have a public hearing. So maybe June 11th, June 4th or June 11th. Well, wait a minute, no, it'd be the 5th or the 12th, keep it on a Wednesday of June.
Well, we're already meeting on the 19th, so we're probably
Okay. Does the 5th work for everybody? All right. Do I need a motion?
Yes.
So I'd like a motion to have a special meet
So moved.
planning commission, okay. Second, okay,
Yeah, we set the, I just want to make sure we don't have a conflict with the.
Oh. all right. Seems like it's a Monday. And a Thursday.
When wards are on Monday, cities on Wednesday.
All right, so is that the first week, the 3rd and the 5th?
Well, he's looking that up, Cynthia. You're changing our meeting from the 28th to the 21st?
No, we're gonna have we're gonna do two special, we're gonna do the 21st for us.
Yeah, that's.
And then on the 28th, there's business.
What time on the
for us.
21st? 1 o'clock?
Yeah,
The ninth.
If that works for you.
Is the city convention, so for the funds.
okay.
So that was June 5.
June 5th.
Yeah,
No. I think you're not scheduled a public hearing, at regular PC meeting, right?
Just
okay, so, okay,
regular PC.
At the 19th.
well, we were gonna schedule,
You don't have 15 days in between.
Oh. Right. right.
For publishing.
Okay.
Well, that would mean moving it to the 29th.
And then it would be 21 days.
Again, I'm slightly missing the urgency. We talked about this 2 years ago. The law's been in effect for 9 years. I mean, I think we should do something, but I'm just.
Well, I,
So my recommendation is that you have the special meeting to do the comparative review and get more feedback. And then at your regular meeting in June, you bring the final draft, and if the PC is comfortable with it, you establish a public hearing for the July meeting.
That seems,
I mean, that would be
still. That's how government works. I mean,
But otherwise, when would we be getting to the sign ordinance in our ordinance revisions?
Yeah,
Oh,
A few years from now.
Yeah.
So that'll be one section we'll already have tackled.
no,
Just change.
we only had
divisions.
Article
The
5
difference.
of the zoning,
yeah.
of the sign code.
This is just for the sign ordinance. This has nothing to do with the zoning.
Section.
One chapter. One chapter.
Okay,
Just figure that out.
oh, okay. So, so you're suggesting we do have the special meeting on June 5th to get feedback?
No,
No, the 29th was that?
no, I was suggesting June 5th
Oh.
for the special meeting to do the comparative analysis,
Mhm.
get additional comments. And then for the regular June meeting would be the final draft. At which time, if the PC is comfortable, they would schedule a public hearing for July.
Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Same time, 6 o'clock.
Yes.
6 o'clock. I would recommend during this time, I know that somebody from the downtown board on the sign committee,
Not current.
not yet. We probably should send a copy over to Amy and have her share it with her board to get feedback from the downtown, because especially on the temporary signs, we get some feedback from them. I'm just trying to get as much feedback as we can before we get down to the final draft. So,
Okay, well,
I mean, that's something we can do internally.
okay. We ready to move on?
You need a motion to schedule a special meeting for June 5th.
Okay,
Thought we
I
had one.
I thought we did too.
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, Charlie made the motion, he seconded, all in favor. Right, moving on. New business, introduction, review and discussion. No, discussion on zoning or districts.
Okay. In your packet, I prepared separate sheets for each zoning district based on Commissioner Paul's request. In terms of showing what permitted and special use permits are allowed in each of all of the zoning districts, to give you an idea of what's allowed in each of the districts and what the dimensional requirements are. I think more importantly, after going through that assessment, I prepared this current zoning ordinance Rosetta Stone table to show you how all of the districts are pyramided on each other. Just to make the point that we've talked about, that when, on some occasions, when we're presented, Lisa and I are presented with a zoning inquiry, you can see where it takes us a while to get through the code to track where the uses are allowed, because they're stacked on one another. With that said, I appreciate what Commissioner Wilmot did, just taking a look at just the residential. Critical to the discussion is the dimensional requirements. Because of the dimensional requirements, for example, you have percentage of coverage between 25 to 35%. You've got stories that are, the lot sizes vary. The maximum height varies pretty much is 25 feet, with the exception of the RM2. And then the rear yard setbacks are pretty much all standardized. So the issue is, part of the discussion is that it's taking a look at the uses to see if there's a significant number of overlap where you can consolidate some districts. And then to figure out what the dimensional requirements will be, or at least try to standardize some of the dimensional requirements. But Commissioner Wilmot's chart really kind of takes that next step towards it. Now, Charlie, I'll let you kind of explain what you did, but
Well, I couldn't, I took your sheets and I tried to lay them all out next to each other and read one to the other, and I said, I can't, I gotta have it all on one page, so. I lead a spreadsheet life, what can I say? Anyway, the point is that I wanted to make the note that the asterisks, the devil's in the details. If it's got an asterisk, then when we consider the possibility of consolidating, we all have to have a command for what those asterisks are in every single instance, because that's where a lot of the nuance is hidden. So it's complicated.
Charlie, what are the asterisks?
There's a special note that in John's pages, there are special notes
With each
that
of
the
these?
asterisk refers.
Okay.
yeah, which leads me to, when you take a look at the note, I found it very interesting. Is that if you read the note, for example, for a single family, I would contend that single family dwellings are not allowed as a permitted use in any residential district. That they're all allowed as a special use. Because based on the conditions that are in the current code, these are conditions in order to have a single family unit. Which means from a planning perspective, you have to meet these requirements. And when you meet those requirements, that's really a special land use. So the way that the current code is set up, I could interpret the fact that a single family, if somebody wanted to build a single family house next to my home on a vacant lot, I could come to the city and say, wait a minute. It's really got to be looked at as a special land use, and you have to have a public hearing because they have to meet all of these requirements. I want you to be cognizant of that some of these permitted uses actually, Charlie noted that they actually have conditions attached to them. And when you have a land use that has conditions, that's a special land use. So we really have to be somewhat sensitive to what do you want to allow as truly as a permitted use versus what do you want to allow as a special land use? Because the way the ordinance is currently set up, some of these things that you think are permitted, because they have all these other conditions attached, I can make the argument that they're actually a special land use. Yeah, and you've got them on them.
I just noted them with an asterisk.
Yeah.
I mean, you spell them out, they're 4 pages.
And these are in the ordinance.
Yeah.
I have a comment. So we have some starting point now for comparisons of uses and dimensions of these residential districts, which is very helpful. Yet I still feel like I need a point of reference. The point of reference would be, for instance, in that I'm somewhat aware of it. I've seen them before, but a plat map. In other words, what is the neighborhood? What is the structure of the neighborhood, how it was created? 50-foot lots, 75-foot lots. For instance, I live in the old part of town on Lake Street. And then my relatives used to live in Curtis Park area. They were clearly different dimensionally, the way the lots were set out.
Right.
So when I think of a zoning district, what makes sense? I mean, you could go master plan, comments from people, keep the character of Petoskey. What is the character? Well, it stems from the way it was platted and the way things were built. Now, some houses would be on 2 lots and you would have that variation in the neighborhood. I think mine are 45 or 50, and one of my house is on 2 lots, but the backyard got shortened, but so you'd see that kind of pattern. So that's helpful to talk about square footage. You get it a little bit with lot width, but again, the frame of reference for a particular neighborhood would be, what does it look like? Well, what it looks like is basically most of the lots are as they were when they were platted.
Correct. Yes.
So that's a very helpful point of reference, which I kind of know, but I want to know more when you make a decision for what's reasonable. Certainly, I guess maybe as a starting point, the way it was set up, like if it were 50-foot lots and we're saying, well, now it says 70, and someone might say is 50 reasonable. if your point of reference was, well, that's the way the whole neighborhood was set up, the answer would probably be, yes, maybe it's reasonable, you know what I mean? So I need that point of reference a little bit. And I don't know how much, John, you feel or are aware that changes around town. A lot of it was done, but some of it newer than others.
Oh, yeah,
So some neighborhoods are gonna be
Well, I
different.
mean, Rick would probably know that too. I mean,
Yeah,
the lots on the south side of the Bear Creek. Like over on Madison, Jackson, Monroe over here.
yeah,
The lots are smaller
yeah,
dimensionally than they are in some of the neighborhoods on the north side of town.
right.
But
right.
you're right, they're based on the
Right.
the original plats that were drawn.
Well, and I always thought that some of them are wrong. I mean, when you look at the zoning ordinance, there are some areas that really are miszoned, you know, the ones that say single family, like on this map. You know, I would argue that the Rosedale area, that neighborhood really shouldn't be single family. You know, those houses are tight to each other, those lots are small, those are almost more like the west side or some sections of the East Mitchell Street neighborhood along Grove and State Street. The character of Rosedale is more like that, so. And then like in my old neighborhood on Bay Street, that's single family from, in effect, from Ted's backyard going north is single family as opposed to R2. And there were a number of neighbors and people that I worked with who, you know, some of these houses didn't have garages. Well, people wanted a garage. Well, you couldn't, because it was zoned single family, you had to have a 10-foot side yard setback. You couldn't have a 5 and a 10 for a total of 15. You had to have 10 and 10 for a total of 20, which meant on the narrow lots, there's no way you could get a garage in there
You're right.
without going to the zoning board of appeals. Well, they couldn't, you know, is it a hardship to not have a garage in northern Michigan in the winter? Well, I kind of think it is, but the zoning board of appeals on a couple of projects I worked on certainly didn't think so.
I think you're gonna find that there is a inconsistency between the zoning district and the lots in many cases. That's why
Right.
we have non-conforming lots, and that's why we have people that come in asking for variances all the time. Because there's not necessarily a strong relationship in all cases between the zoning district and the width of the lot or the square footage of the lot.
So doesn't that get to goals? Like what are the goals here? Like one goal could be, we've heard this before. Gee, we'd like the zoning to somewhat, on one level, reflect the neighborhood. In other words, what's basically built there, if you take my old neighborhood, my garage has 0 setback. Would you allow that in that neighborhood? Because that's how it is. In other words, you make basically what's there compliant. So should someone have my garage is from 1920, should I ever redo it? Like rebuild the same thing because the foundation is probably, it's just not you don't have all these ZBA non-compliant things. You basically in the neighborhood you live can do the same thing, you know what I mean? Or maybe the neighbor wants to do, you know, so that could be a goal to make it, you know, make the zoning reflect the character of the neighborhood.
That should be a goal, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that should be a goal.
Albert?
Yeah, I was gonna say something. I had the worst paper out in Petoskey. I started on Wapazoo Street and I ended up every other block all the way to the Market Basket or what's called now, where Scoops is. I don't know how I got that lot, but I think I was low on the total pole. There wasn't, other than I had Valley View, which is a new subdivision, and a couple on Spruce Street. But even those, I mean, there's no lot in that whole area that was more than 50 feet. And one of the things I know we're talking about is trying to add, I mean, the whole goal here, right? The big goal is housing for, as like the plan is, right? To get housing for workforces. I can't see us doing anything with those lots that's gonna help with workforce housing. Because you lose a house, but you're gonna have to put a house in that spot with whatever rent, unless we have a developer come in and tear down a whole neighborhood, which is gonna be awful expensive type of thing. So I kind of agree with trying to stay with the character look for places that can infill, and if those areas need to be changed. In the infill area, I'm great for it, but I think some of these, you know, the first house we had in Grove Street. There's a house right now, there's a brick house right next to that duplex that grew up that is always under contention. My parents' house was next to that, there's 5 houses around that, the first house we had. You could literally open Archie's window and shake hands. It's not a joke, you could do it. And our driveway on Harvey Street, the 2 garages were this far apart. And I think my parents' lot was 48 feet, and the other people had bought 2 feet a lot to get their garage in or whatever. But yeah, that's a lot of Petoskey, and I don't know how changing zoning in those areas a lot, as far as dimensional requirements and things like that, is going to help us with housing.
I just wanted to clarify, it's not just workforce housing, it's increasing density. And whether that is, you know, workforce housing, people moving up as retirees, young working families, teachers, doctors, nurses, whatever it is, but just increasing that density.
And the typology of the house. Because most communities have single family and then they may have apartments. But in some communities, they don't have duplexes, they don't have triplexes, they don't allow. For example, they won't allow a duplex that's on a first floor that are connected with each other, like a attached duplex. So I think the purpose of the grant from MISHDA was to just take a look at the ordinance relative to what could be done to provide other opportunities for people as they kind of age in place, and then for younger families and professionals, just a kind of like it's like an open menu. You know, take a look at your housing stock. Let's figure out if there's any opportunities. And then the other part of it is, are there any barriers in the ordinance that complicate people from building housing that we want to take?
Right, and the obvious barrier would then be, again, of course, maybe I should ask again. I mean, we should have in front of us some kind of map about all these open lots, because we're trying to fill all of this, and I think there's not a lot. I think Petoskey is pretty built out.
Pretty much built.
So, I mean, what are we actually talking about here? But no, if we have zoning in an area and there's a small lot left and the zoning basically is making it impossible to do anything, yet that was a typical lot in the neighborhood, that would be ridiculous. You know, we should fix that. But again, how many of those opportunities do we have? I'm as worried as much about, I think we should be talking about tear downs, because a big problem for our housing may not be issues. We might be talking about how much we think we could add or where we could fit stuff in. And then we have a map of how many open lots there are, and we find out there's 3 or 4 or 5, you know what I mean? So gee, maybe we could have 3 houses in town. Wouldn't that be great? And in the meantime, I'm worried about tear downs, people taking 2 lots, 2 houses, ripping them down and making 1 house. That house is going to be less, there's going to be less housing stock. It may not be in character with the neighborhood, and it's going to be really expensive. So we're going to go against every possible thing we want to do if we don't work on that issue.
Well, right, the Bigfoot phenomenon, and that's happening.
It's a real thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Well-
that's why we need regulations.
Right, so issues like, I don't know if the ability to legislate, or, you know, can you combine lots or not, or how that process works. I don't know if that's a thing you can do in a city. Again, what are some of the tools that we have as we look at that issue too, moving forward?
These are all great sensitivities, but the other objective of this process is to simplify the code.
Right,
And we can recognize right away from John's work and from my work,
yeah,
it's convoluted.
yeah,
And we can just look for areas of unnecessary redundancy, unnecessary unique characteristics in the footnotes that just aren't pertinent anymore.
Right.
And so
Right.
there is a really useful, you know, I don't want to dismiss the idea that this review is not appropriate. It is very appropriate, if for no other reasons than simplification and fairness. Is our current zoning code fair to all of our neighborhoods? So there's a lot to consider as we go through this on a point by point
the
basis.
R1, R2, and R3, when you put them down on paper, to me are pretty similar. That said, it's not like we have equal, when I'm looking at this map, we have a lot of R2. A little bit of R1, a little bit of R3, if I looked at it correctly, the colors. So again, proportionally what we're talking about, but they do seem pretty similar. The uses are pretty similar. The lot dimensions change slightly, but you know. So is there,
This would indicate that there are some real disparities.
Because of your asterisks.
No, look down below, you know, the districts that allow cemeteries, which is a kind of preposterous thing to even include, okay? But, you know, the ones that allow nursery schools, all the residential districts are not equal.
Right, but Ted, you were saying
I'm
R1 through R3.
R1 through R3,
Yeah,
like those are very similar, and then the multifamilies expand uses and get into different things.
Just keep it on.
And then there's a different height requirement or allowance on that RM2.
Well, a consideration is should some of those that are allowed in RM districts be also be allowed in residential districts.
Yeah, we can talk about that, obviously.
Mhm. You know, at the meeting that I missed, I watched the video. And good job, well done. But you had a mathematical solution to lots. In other words, a small lot maybe wouldn't be non-conforming if you did that mathematical where. If your lot is such and such, you have to have these setbacks and you're allowed to build this percentage. So it makes that lot buildable.
Mhm.
And then, so you tweak it so everybody's kind of the same distance apart.
Well, I mean, if you take,
Same density.
if you take a look at Ted's chart, just start out with rear setback. It's 35 feet all the way across.
Mhm.
So what I was getting at the workshop was, if you take a lot and you say that a residential lot has a 35-foot setback, I think it could be even smaller. But your current code is 35 feet for the rear.
Mhm.
The front, to get where you're going, Ted, can be based on the neighborhood pattern.
Mhm.
So you could say that the front yard setback of a new house is the average of the existing homes on the block,
Mhm.
plus or minus a couple of feet each way.
Mhm.
So that establishes the front. The sides, what we found a good ratio is, the sides are 12% of the width of the lot, or 8 feet, whichever is greater.
Whichever is great.
Greater. So as the width of the lot increases, so does the side yard setback. The front's based on the average, and the rear is established by either 30 or 35 feet. So it really doesn't matter what neighborhood you're in.
Mhm.
It's based on the size of the lot and based on the mathematic, based on the math.
Mhm.
And then you look at your use table that Charlie did
Yeah.
and say, okay, that's the uses that can go on. That's one way of doing it. And that kind of gets to what Commissioner Paul was saying, is trying to follow what the historical neighborhood pattern is. Now, I know in some historic communities, Rick's familiar with this with his travels around the state as a preservation architect. Some of the older residential neighborhoods have garages which used to be carriage houses, and they're built right on the property line. And in today's world, if you tore it down, you'd be required to build it 30 or 35 feet back, but you could also have requirements or standards in the ordinance that when you get into a situation of like a historic neighborhood, that the development patterns would actually, depending on the accessory structure, which you had, if you had a garage, the accessory structures would also be based on the historical development pattern of the neighborhood. And that way, that's how you can maintain your character. But, you know, what we're dealing with is the old-fashioned Euclidean zoning ordinance, which is very prescriptive, which everybody has to follow it and has little regard for how the neighborhoods were constructed in the past. So that's,
And yet we know, and the important thing, because I've been on enough of these things and these discussions, it would go in abuse in different ways, but well, I'll just go to the ZBA. Well, as you know, the ZBA has a very strict task before it. and it kind of proving some kind of hardship. So you can't just go to the ZBA. You can't normally be successful at the ZBA and just saying, well, my neighbor 2 houses away has a garage that goes this to the back. That doesn't quite prove the case by the standards. So they get denied under our current one. So the ZBA is an outlet for things, but it doesn't really address the way you might with what you're talking about.
Right.
Keeping a historical pattern.
And would that be a fairness issue if one neighborhood, they had their accessory building could be on the lot line and another neighborhood, it was historically built, so it's 35 feet?
If you follow the historical patterns of the neighborhood.
Right.
Some of the neighborhoods, like, over here, the lots are so small that very few people have garages.
Mhm,
The other part is some of the neighborhoods don't have alleys,
mhm.
where you used to have a garage in the back off of the alley. So to try to codify that can be
Mhm.
really complicated.
Right.
Unless you have standards that say, okay, we're gonna kind of, some of the dimensional requirements are actually gonna be based on what we currently have in our neighborhood.
Right, and I don't like to argue this way, but I think there's some validity to it for the average person, which would be. I just bought this house, I moved in this neighborhood, maybe this old neighborhood, and I want to do something, and I see my neighbor's got it. So I just kind of would like to do that, and it's like, no, that's not allowed.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, you might think, well, that's okay in this neighborhood because. There's this old carriage house, so I'll just do something exactly like that.
Right.
No, not allowed.
Albert?
Can I just ask a couple of newbie definitions?
Yeah.
But looking at the chart, a couple of these charts. Where it says, accessory buildings are permitted. Like R2. Under permitted, it says accessory buildings, and then under special use permits, it says accessory buildings again. So is that because there's different,
Conditions attached.
okay,
Yeah.
so that goes back to your point. That you, okay, because that's a lot of places we have that, and also, we passed the ordinance in 2022 on ADUs.
Mhm.
And that's not mentioned here anywhere. I don't think.
Some of the, like the ADUs is not, if you pull the copy of the current zoning ordinance off the internet,
Right,
it's not gonna have those amendments in it.
right, right,
So, so ADUs should show up in the chart eventually.
right. I mean, they're pretty much permitted in R1, which means they're permitted by pyramid and everything. I know.
I see Charlie's got short-term rentals in here. What's GF mean?
Grandfather.
Grandfather, okay. Grandfather.
You can, that's good.
So I mean, we gotta take this a chunk at a time. I mean, if we wanna focus on residential for a while. What are some of the issues that you want me to research for you?
Well, I said, to the extent that it's practical and you can do it, some feeling for. How these different neighborhoods are platted. In relation to what. We'll be talking in relation to our current zoning.
I'll have to figure out where the plat maps are at.
So you would be able to look at that and maybe provide us some data, but also just a commentary about. Gee, I noticed this in this street. It's maybe our current zoning doesn't even seem to make sense. In some way or another, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it's more of a citywide, like drive around, walk around and visual, not necessarily looking back at the old plotted sites. Cause what's here is here. Things have changed.
Existing
since then.
characters.
Yeah,
Short of people combining lots, normally. It seems to me, people would often buy a lot and build on it. And when you can very quickly go through, because I've got the plan map for my neighborhood and they're all the same. Then some people would put 2 together.
right, but
So-
we always regulate a maximum lot size in an R1 or R2
Right. It's,
to eliminate that from happening.
yeah, I'm just saying it's helpful for me to know on this street.
I'll take a look at where I can get a hold of them.
like when I say maximum lot width, I might be assuming that in a current district that lot width is common, but what if I found out on the street it's more or less? Like all the houses, it would be, I would want to know that.
That's
I don't know that.
It's a minimum lot width.
Right, that's, if you go to the equalization, you can pull up pretty much every lot line there is. You know, and see what they are in general. And I was looking at the same thing. I thought, my sister's from Montana, we walked around Michigan Street and our old stopping grounds to see her friends. And I thought, so what happens if one of these burns down? So what happens is, you know, and it does say that if more than 60% of a structure is lost, it has to conform. So now we're gonna have an empty lot that you might not be able to do anything with because, you know, it's.
Well, at least the zoning board of appeals will probably think of that as a chat case.
I'd rather see, I guess what I'm saying, I'd rather see what is instead of what we wish we had. Where in those big historical neighborhoods, what is, and then
Right.
zone to what is. And make room for what we need at the same time.
I agree, and then we throw out the word historic neighborhoods, but we don't have it, we have one residential historic, do we have a residential historic neighborhood?
Mitchell, Lake Street.
So, I mean, maybe we should be looking at more of our single family residential as historic, even Jackson Street, less historic,
Oh, yeah.
so.
There could be a
Need to-
couple more residential historic districts for sure, but those are only National Register historic districts, you know, they don't really control anything that happens.
Right, but
You
it's.
have to have a locally designated historic district in order to actually affect how houses are kept or changed or added to.
But for the purposes of zoning, Rick, if we, even if it. You know, if we define these areas. In some way, we might be able to use that when we're writing the code, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I remember,
So we all-
remember during the workshop, I showed you a slide where city of Mount Pleasant was designing their zoning codes based on character zones. So each character zone had its own kind of description of what its qualities or elements were. Some maybe be small lots, 2-story homes, garage in the back. That kind of thing that kind of describes the character of the district. That which can be important if someone bought a small house, wanted to tear it down and build a bigger house, which was out of context with the neighborhood. You have a character zone that says, wait a minute, time out, it's not within the character of the district. So these are the things to think about.
So if you have
And-
character, if you have character zones. Are they going to be named R1, R2, R3, are we gonna have multi?
You could, or you come up with your own creative name, I don't, doesn't.
But one of the goals is to reduce the amount of zones we have.
Correct.
Yeah, and
So-
You know, that's not, it doesn't have to be a goal to consolidate zones. But I think where Charlie was going with this, when you take a look at this. You've got some zones that, in terms of land uses, they're almost identical. The only difference is the dimensional requirements.
well, and some of the existing circumstances aren't really that different. I mean, thinking of what Charlie's saying about consolidating districts, when you think about the 3 single family districts, R1, R2, and R3. Well, R2 and R3 are much more alike than is R1. R1, you look at, you know, the setback requirements and the lot area coverage requirements and just R1 neighborhoods that exist, which are very few in our city. Mostly everything is R2 and R3.
Right,
But,
And
you know, I think. You gave me a thought, Rick. What we could do, because we have GIS. Is. Just, and this would be, this is.
The texture of the
Well,
neighborhood.
yeah, that, but you know, the thing would be with the GIS would say, the query would be. Show me residential, anything that's zoned residential. Show me a lot that's. Equal to or greater than 8,400 square feet. And it would show in the city where they're all located. Now, I'm betting that you're not gonna find them all in one area. Okay, just like if we said, show us develop a map that's got lots that are equal to or less than 6,000 square feet. And I'll bet you they're scattered all over. And that's my guess, which then kind of proves the point that some of these districts may be
Artificial.
artificial.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that could be one exercise that we could do rather quickly, I think.
Well, and I also think the regulated uses, we could easily go through and strike out some quickly that are in the residential neighborhoods.
Right.
Well,
And then
another
see
good
what's left
question,
over.
sorry.
And then see what's left over.
So, John, we don't have, again, I hope people agree we're pretty built out here. So, in the few cases left, or unfortunately, should there be a tear down situation, what's allowed? Or, as you said, if you make it in character with the neighborhood dimensionally without numbers, but, like you said, like you approach with front yard setbacks and that kind of thing. That kind of solves the issue of, that it seems to be a good way to go, maybe, to me.
With a community like.
Then I don't have to make artificial R1, R2, R3. Something's happening on the street. We kind of like it to look like what's there. Your kind of approach with averaging is pretty much gonna do that.
Yeah.
So
And we have the technology to do it. I mean.
Right.
It's relatively easy to do.
then I don't have to put down numbers that work in one place and not
Not
another.
in another,
Yeah,
or even within the same neighborhood,
right.
So. Yeah, I'll run the analysis on the GIS just to. Cause there's gonna be people in the community, they're gonna want to know what the rationale was.
Mhm.
And I think maybe one of the initial steps is analyzing what these zones are and based on their dimensions, are they even working properly?
Mhm. Well, it's interesting because I think if hopefully I'm correct here, but when I look at the plat map going up Lake Street, my neighborhood, it's very regular. They're small lots, but in some areas they routinely put lots together. So the look of my block from Williams up to Clinton, I think there's 3 houses, is very different than another block up the street. But yet on the map, it looks like this. So if something changed, a lot of times people want things to look kind of how they were. So again, this approach of averaging and might be a good way to do it.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. But I think the other part of it is let's take a look at what type of regulated uses are in the district.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
But it's interesting to listen to this conversation because we have wards, we have zoning districts. And when you start to think about our city, you really do have neighborhoods with character, different characters. That's not necessarily a ward or a zoning district.
Right.
And I think that is something that we should consider.
Block by block.
Well, block by block, yeah. But different areas of town have just a different feel to them that should be respected and appropriately brought into the code somehow. It sounds very complicated to do these character districts, but I think it should be considered.
Well, probably a little bit easier than what you think. I think to get with the idea of taking if everybody just took their own visual tour of the community and wrote down some mental notes or even some written notes on different, and put it on the map, we could start really, yeah.
Well, and more or less, when you look at the zoning map and you think about it, they're not exactly precise, but these zoning districts and different colors do represent the different character areas more or less.
Right.
Well, it'd be interesting to take like a coloring book page without any colors on it. And for you to then see color it in for yourself and see how you feel it would shape the character neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I mean, just for instance, like your house, what is your lot size? Do you know the square footage?
I sit on a 90 by 90, but it was 2 lots. So it was 45 by 130. But then they sold the back part to my neighbor in the 20s, so I got 90 by 90, but it would have been 2 45s by 130, I think.
So what is that, 1800? 90 by 90?
99, 8100.
8100. So like,
Yeah.
if it was zoned, so R3, which could be a two-family dwelling if the lot is greater than 6,500 square feet. So somebody could buy your house and convert it into 2 units. Like. So looking at combining the, R3 with the R1 and the R2. Like, that seems feasible. We need to think about the what ifs for these areas.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily a tear down, but it's, could they do this in this location? I think everyone has to think about that too. Like, okay, it's something is here now, but if we're allowing it, how different could it actually look?
Right.
John, can you produce a city map that doesn't have any colors on it?
Yeah.
Or just the streets?
Just streets, I can also just do streets and lots,
Yeah, lots, that would be cool.
just lot lines with the streets
Yeah,
From the GIS. in other
from the
words.
GIS.
then you can get a feel. At least,
Yeah.
Cause that, then if we each had one of those, we could kind of conceptualize
right,
our own vision of
Right.
what those neighborhoods are and.
Well, maybe the way to do it as a group, because the zoning code shouldn't be written, and then we have to kind of put a square peg in a round hole. Okay? Look, we kind of reverse engineer it. We want to establish the areas and the character. And then you want to codify it.
Right,
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe what we do as a group is we start out with the map and we pick an area of town. And everybody before the next meeting would go out there and maybe from their own perspective, try to figure out what makes sense to them relative to character areas. And then at the meeting, we all get together and compare notes and see exactly
exactly.
what the
yes.
commonalities are.
100%.
And then describe what makes that area unique from another area. And that starts building the kind of like the elements of the character zones that eventually we can figure out how to codify. How's that sound?
Yeah, and I think if you did that along with the regulated, the use of the regulated uses, a list of it, then you could go through and be like, well, that makes no sense. That shouldn't be in this
Correct.
area.
Yes.
And then we can start to,
Well, assuming John got them all, that is the list of regulated uses for
Right.
all residential. yeah,
Right.
that's-
But when you take a look at character zones, just don't take a look at the lot, take a look at the building. But then also take a look at the other, elements like street trees, does it have sidewalks?
Mhm.
Does the area have curb and gutter? Those are all part of the character too, that you have to kind of codify, so. But
yeah, is it walkable? It doesn't make sense to have a high density residential where there are no sidewalks here.
exactly,
You know.
you have to take a look at the whole thing, because
Yeah.
when you create the ordinance. You not only codify what's going on the private property, but what also happens in the public realm. As part of it, so if somebody does develop it. If they're in an area that has sidewalks, then they're required to have a sidewalk. If it has street trees, you want to do the whole thing. So,
So when you provide these maps, we're gonna pick an area and then everybody is.
yeah, what area do you want to start with? Tell me the area, then we'll create the map that's big enough that you can draw.
I'm not sure what size is feasible for this exercise. What you think, how big of an area you want to tackle at one time, I don't.
I wouldn't say like the whole. One side of the community. We're talking maybe divide the community up into. Maybe 8 areas, divide the city up into. Like different sheets, and then we can go sheet by sheet, and then eventually.
Yeah,
have a consolidated
You
map.
put it all on one sheet, a manageable size as opposed to the big beautiful ones you got.
Right, but on a-
Yeah, manageable size,
Right.
you're not gonna have any,
Right,
you're gonna lose detail if you do the whole city in there.
yes. So I'll do that, and then what we can do is.
yeah, if you could, I think you could pick.
I'll pick them out, and then we'll get them to you before the next regular meeting.
Yeah.
So you have an
So,
opportunity
could
to
you-
do some homework.
Could you add a list of the things we should be, like you said, curb,
Yeah.
tree,
I'll put it on the back.
suggestions of what we should be looking for?
In the map, we have lot lines.
Yeah, I don't have lot
And then,
lines in the
so
street.
are we coloring this blank?
You
Want to?
if you can color it if you want to, and if you don't, just scribble on it, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay,
I feel like what Rick was saying is we could just use the color map we have of our current districts. And when you say like, okay, we're gonna look at the R1, R2, and R3 today. You know, for this exercise, then it's RM1, RM2, and then it's the B1 and B2, and then the B3s. I think that would help simplify it, because we
yeah.
already know this.
Cause this is a big jump on, big start.
Yeah.
Hold up your map, Rick. That area that's in the light yellow on the right hand side, that's a big neighborhood to cover.
And it doesn't have a lot of detail in terms of alleys or.
Yeah.
It's a little big on one,
Right, I'm just saying as far as the
yeah.
areas that we're gonna cover.
Yeah.
Like we could say, okay, we're gonna concentrate on the R1, R2, and R3, but he'll still overlay it with the alleys and what.
And what really
The
gets
plots.
confusing, I can't remember whether that big one is set up the same way, cause that one has different colors.
Those are
but
colors. yeah.
When you look at R1, single family, you know, there's these huge areas of so-called R1. But when you really think about what they aren't really R1 neighborhoods. You know, Greenwood Cemetery, Magnus Park, the Bear River Valley.
that's the
North Central Michigan College, the Winter Sports Park, Bayfront Park. All these things.
My comment,
Yeah, designated
Give me that comment.
Well, you've also got the high school on here.
yeah, and the high school.
Taking up valuable written space that you don't need.
Well, that would be in your notes. Where,
Right.
why is a high school in this R1? Why is this in this area?
so yeah, I don't know what that issue was. I had brought that up about. Some of the colors, things look like R1, but there was a Bear River Valley.
Yeah, because mine's different color than yours.
So I don't know if we needed more colors or
I
that's.
think what you need is, I don't think you, I'm confused. I work with so many communities. I don't think you have a community zoning district. Do
Well,
you?
there's a park reserve, and I've always been confused by this too, because, you know, this dark green is park reserve. But then all the parks that we have in the community aren't dark green, you know, there's.
Yeah.
There's parks all over the place, like Curtis Place, well, that's not dark green.
Yeah, some communities have a community zoning district or public.
And I think the word is, that's the land that only by citizen referendum can be changed from park use, whereas other parks that aren't in the park reserve
Right,
are a different
waiting for.
legal status.
right, and I was aware of the Parks and Recs master plan, which lists all the parks, and. I assume those are all, I thought they would all be park reserve. But they're not showing that way color wise.
Okay.
Yeah, Lockwood Park's not shown either.
Yeah.
Albert,
Sorry.
Our biggest geographic is, if I'm reading this, my colors right, is a brighter yellow R2. It seems like if you took that and maybe divided that up into two sessions. Cause it should be similar if it's R2, and we're gonna find out that the parts of it aren't. But if we kind of looked at R2 as a first chunk and then say, now we got that kind of middle district. Then how, if R1 is very small compared to it, and so is R3. So that way, if you kind of, the first time about looking, we all look at parts of R2. And I don't know that we need all 9 of us to look at R2, maybe 4 of us could look at one half of R2 and 4 of us could look at the other half of R2 or something like that, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's up to John, but I'm just thinking, if you take that biggest district first, geographic district, tackle what are the characteristics of that, and then you'll be able to compare R1 and R3 to that. And I just think of that, we have.
Well, I think it was a useful exercise to have everyone look at
Everything.
specific areas, just to get that kind of, different people see different things, you're right?
Right.
Board of us.
That's what's
That's why
useful.
there's 9 of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just had one question, the history of the high school land, did we inherit that from Bear Creek because they wanted our water in the sewer? Does anybody know? Did we inherit that land?
Yeah, I think at the time the high school was developed, I don't go back that far, but I think my recollection of having heard is that somehow it needed to be adopted as part of the city to develop the high school out there.
And then the middle schools added in
Right.
and all of that, okay.
But the specifics, I don't know.
The old days when they had annexation.
Right, yes.
I don't think we ever annexed.
Well, this chunk out here,
Yeah. Wasn't that a farm? And the school bought the farm?
Foster Farm.
Foster's own part of it.
Yeah,
My uncle owned part of it, but
yeah.
the deal.
I see the Foster house is gone now, so it's all reverted to the school.
Okay, so I'll get maps ready and we'll get the maps to you and then you guys.
So
start
we're focusing on residential at.
focusing on those.
Can I have a quick question, John, just as a meeting, but, so then I looked a little bit at the business districts, and it looks like there's 8 of them. And I kind of was dimensionally looking at them and, obviously the CBD is a little different height wise, and B2A, B2B were, 3 stories, 37. And then all these other ones were pretty similar dimensionally that, resort, B3A, B3B, had different setbacks, I think because of their being on the view corridor. But anyway, there was a lot of commonality there. And so we're probably into uses really for those districts. And, I guess that whole question we'll get into is, does all that make sense, or is it?
I think the easiest part of this is gonna be, let's tackle the residential.
Right.
And then that'll give us a kind of a springboard to get into the more detailed discussion about.
Right. It's a little simpler, and it might help us, yeah.
Yeah.
I do the same thing looking through my homework. The one that surprised me, and I thought maybe it was a typo. But then I went right to the ordinance. It says the hospital, one of the hospital districts could be 701 feet for height. I thought maybe it was supposed to be 70.1.
It's 701 feet. That's how do you say that?
Elevation.
It's elevation.
Elevation.
So-
From the
Sea level. Sea level.
Yeah,
Oh, sea level, sea
Sea
level.
level.
Lake level.
sea level.
Well, like it'd be from the Lake Michigan elevation is 580.
582.
So you're allowed 200.
120 feet from the lake up.
Feet.
Mhm.
That was
It
just-
was an effort to allow them height, but also to keep it, if I remember right. So that it stayed under the tree thing, so.
Well, wasn't that based on what's already there?
Mhm.
And it was a second view shed coming back.
Yeah, right.
So they didn't block the bay.
And it was hard because that property has such an angle. that-
And the good thing for us is they just had a massive, new tower, patient tower, ORs, ICUs. So for the next short, long-term period, the main structure is, I think, pretty much there. I mean, you always wonder, but they just had a massive redo, so,
Yeah.
so.
So that was the effort to protect the view.
I need your question.
And then, are we good with the next step?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Then, the other part that, was part of the zoning report was.
oh, right.
I want to, on a monthly basis, give you a report on people that commented on the zoning website.
okay.
And our largest comment was over. That's small, so.
Disregard that.
But we, I would say we have about 20 people so far that have signed up. We have about 20 people that have signed up for updates. And they keep coming in every day.
Someone told me they were trying to search and having trouble finding it. just on, I don't know if it was a Google search, just
Petoskey zone.
Petoskey zoning
Right,
.org is the. So. Do we have on our city website a link to that or at least, okay.
And then I think city manager also put the link on the utility bill.
Okay.
Can anybody speak to Jillian and maybe get an article about the process kicking in?
On that,
On the paper,
oh, paper.
Jillian Fellows, I guess she's the editor now.
I'll get with the city manager.
Great.
I think that that probably when there's something to report, the city would write a press release.
Well, certainly when there's something to report, but to
Just give them a heads up.
encourage, participation and
Mhm,
visiting the website and that kind of thing.
okay.
John, do you have any comments with regard to some of the Harbor Springs controversy and how that may or may not help us or shape what we do or short version?
The Harbor Springs controversy stems around, I hate to say it, it's almost like a conspiracy theory from a group of people that said because the city of Harbor Springs was awarded a grant from the state through the RRC program to update their zoning code, that it's an attempt by the state to take over the city of Harbor Springs and then to create a code that would allow them to have affordable housing. That's my synopsis of all of the comments. Very little to do, I think, with the substance of the code. But it has a lot to do with, unfortunately, it has a lot to do with the fact that there's a group of people in town that don't want anything to change. And they've kind of, if you look at their material, they consistently represent the RRC program as a kind of a subversive state program to take over land use and zoning decisions.
Do you feel that the people who are concerned are, because I don't know much about it, honestly, are more like long-term residents, or is it more like people who vacation there? Is it?
My understanding is the people that are the ones that have the political action committee that have their own website and that are doing robocalls and sending out massive emails are actually, I think the majority of them are seasonal property owners. So.
All right, getting back to the agenda, public comment. Is there anyone online that would like to make a comment? Okay. Now commissioner comments. Okay, well,
I'll throw one in.
okay.
I just wanted to point out that we also received and have in our packets the letter from the mayor.
Thank you. I meant to say.
And so I just think it sets a good, healthy tone for the process that we're engaging. And coordinates everybody's thinking about how to move forward. So just wanted to recognize it.
Okay.
And if I could then, just to tell her that, I appreciate that, but I think it's so important that I know people on council get involved, but that the group, we work with them as a group, and I think we'll be most effective, us and them as a group, because that's how bodies act as a group, so.
Matt?
Yeah, I just want to thank Charlie for the extra work he put in for this meeting. So thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Very helpful.
I had to do it to figure it out. So.
Right. So updates? No updates, wow. Wow, what?
City manager.
I'll just provide, if there was ever a desire of planning commission to do a tour of the neighborhoods using, we do have access to the trolley
Oh,
and do group drive arounds if you so choose to schedule something like that, that is available.
okay. All right, well, that would involve.
There it goes.
Can you do a horse-drawn carriage?
Still obviously a public meeting, so anyone can jump on. Not back on. So.
Okay,
Gosh.
so it would have, we would have to schedule it. It would be unless it was 3 or 2. How small would it have to be?
Members?
Yeah.
So they have to be less than 1, but I think
Okay.
what.
Yeah, I'm saying that collectively as a group,
Yeah,
it's still,
yeah,
still a meeting, we still post it that we're going
Okay.
on a remote tour and people can jump on as well.
Can you get through the alleys?
Or they can.
well, there you go.
Let's look.
I did have a question. What is happening down at the Michigan Maple Block? I saw they're starting to tear stuff down there.
Yeah, abatement is happening now, demolition should follow shortly thereafter. So that project is moving forward.
So they got through all the hurdles that had been kind of
Yes,
thrown up in the way then.
And the
Yeah.
financing,
yeah, everything's in order.
wonderful.
Great.
Great.
How about the water removal and processing of their removed water?
That is still being worked out, so they have a significant amount of dewatering that needs to happen because of the high groundwater there, so. Whenever they dig a trench for utilities, those trenches are going to fill with groundwater, so they need a mechanism to pump the groundwater off. So one option is to send it to us, run through our treatment facility, or get a permit from the state and release it to the river. So certainly environmentally, we'd rather it come to us.
Mhm.
But there's some concerns there, so it's not
Well, there's a capacity issue, isn't there?
capacity issue, especially during wet weather times, and then we don't want, your wastewater plant doesn't want to have significant slugs of clean water going to it, because there's microorganisms there that do a significant job, obviously. So if we send a bunch of clean, and clean is relative, but send a bunch of clean water through there, it could disrupt our treatment process, so there's a quantity issue and a quality issue that we're concerned about, so we're working through those scenarios.
Is there any issue with contaminants at that point?
Yeah, there's a few contaminants of concern, and so what we have proposed is a batch system where they would pump into frac tanks. We would then sample that frac tank, make sure that all the contaminants are in line or underneath our limits. And then once we confirm that, we would allow that to be released at a certain flow rate that does not inundate our system. So they are proposing a continuous release. Once the pumps start, they would just run 24/7. We're reluctant to do that for a variety of reasons, but we're still working through those with them.
Is tip of the Met watershed involved?
They have been involved in the past, not necessarily kind of looking at the dewatering aspect, but they were in charge, or they answered, I think they came to this body at one point and talked about, and they are hauling more soil off the site as was recommended by the tip of the mitt, but there's still some dewatering that needs to happen, so. They also are going the route of trying to get a permit from Eagle to discharge to the river. That's a fairly long process, about a 6-month process. So they're weighing that as well, but. First and foremost, I need to protect the integrity of our treatment system. And so that is very concerning as well. So we're watching all that. That hasn't been, to answer your question, hasn't been completely figured out quite yet, but we're working through that.
What about loft at Lumber Square?
Yeah, I was told by Han that all their financing is in order. There are a few environmental issues that Misha has raised that I think they're going back to Emmett County Brownfield to try to get some brownfield dollars to support that initial or that additional environmental that came up. But I'm also told that's ready to go, but hasn't moved yet, but Yeah,
J.C. Penney seems to have stalled. Any word on that?
there's active work going on, not as quickly. I was asking Mike about how long did we give them for the temporary, sidewalk? Cause I think what might happen, we may pull that off for the busy summer season because there's not anything actively going on the exterior. But we're gonna evaluate that, talk to their contractor. There is significant steel work that will be happening later this summer. But there are things going on there. It's just another one of those frustrating. Let's keep going, let's move, and the schedule is not what they had initially proposed, which is challenging and frustrating at the same time. But they're still working. There's still active work going on a daily basis, but just not moving as quickly as we would have hoped.
Yeah, and these days it's really challenging to get all the trades lined up right, to be in there at the right times and get what needs to be done next done.
Anything else? We are officially adjourned at 7:56 PM.
Well, everything. Interesting. Yeah, it's always